If you grew up in the 90s like I did, chances are you grew up watching some amazing cartoons. One of my favorites is Batman the Animated Series. There's just something about it. I couldn't look away. And one thing I remember the most is that car. I was in love with the Batmobile. I just loved everything about it. I thought it looked amazing. All of the curves, the color, everything about it. So as an adult, I got into collecting action figures. And one thing that I'm missing in my collection is a Batman the Animated Series Batmobile. DC Collectibles did release a Batmobile back in 2015 and it retailed for about $85. But getting your hands on one of those is kind of hard. Recent listings on eBay show astronomical prices, somewhere around $200 starting, which is quite a bit more than I'm willing to pay. So I came to one conclusion.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
Full disclosure, I won't be doing this all by myself. I'll be using a 3D file made by RMYERSCAD on colts3d.com. First step was to go on that site and type in BTAS inspired Batmobile. It's actually pretty hard to find any good files for anything Batman the Animated Series. There's a lot of bad files online, and this was one of the first files that I found directly related to the television show. Once the file is downloaded, I go ahead and open it up with the provided software, which is Bambu Studio. Now, I'm not an expert by any means, so if anybody has any suggestions, I'm more than open to listening to them. What I'm doing here is just playing with a few of the settings that I've kind of learned to incorporate. And then I'm going to go right into slicing it, and I kind of rotate it around just to see how much of it's going to be support. If looking at it, I think maybe the build won't actually build correctly. And a lot of that's done through trial and error. And then once I do that, I send it to the printer and wait, make sure that it actually sends completely and that it starts printing. And we wait and wait. Now I've sped this up for purposes of time. Pretty much the process is going to be repeated. Now, unfortunately, I did not screen record opening up the other files, sending them to the printer. There's a few things that I did record, so I'll include those. Overall, process will be the same. You click on the file, you open it in the software, you may play with some of the settings, you slice it, and you send it to the printer, and then you wait. A lot of time will be spent waiting depending on the settings and the strength that you choose. Here I am just kind of looking at the prints and trying to get an idea of what the overall item is going to look like. So I start to kind of line up the pieces as they print. And you can kind of tell that in some areas the print isn't necessarily the smoothest, but that's something we can try and fix later on. Take note, this is where I made a mistake. I got a little too ambitious and I tried to put too many things on the plate. And more than that, I think just too many things that were a little too different. So as you can see, catastrophic failure. So I had to go back, kind of reorganize what I was going to be printing. And thankfully this time around, it worked. But now, like I said, we wait for the rest of the parts to print. But you won't have to. We got some cooking show magic going on. We open up an oven door and out comes a fully cooked and prepared meal. Now this part is going to be a little fast. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do want to showcase all of the different parts that did print out. You can see the grill, you saw the rims, the tires, that's the console that goes inside along with the seats, the frame. And as mentioned before, some of the parts like that one didn't really print out the smoothest. That may be my fault, but also certain things are just not going to necessarily print out the smoothest. I'm sure that there are people who are really good at using a 3D printer and all of the settings and they can probably do a better job. But for somebody who's fairly new to this, just kind of wants to do it to be able to print cool stuff out, it's not always going to be perfect. So here I am starting to glue all of the pieces, and I'm going to be posting all of the items that I use in the description, but quickly, I am using a combination of Gorilla Clear Grip Glue and E600, and I let it sit overnight so that it can actually adhere fully with the E600. And again, mentioning some parts just didn't come out that smooth, but again, we'll fix it in post. I had a little trouble getting these two pieces to adhere, so I had to keep going back and forth, and that's where the idea of using both glues came from. Here I'm showing how I went over these particular areas more than once, and at this stage I used plastic wood filler and acetone, mixed it in a bottle, and began to brush it onto the 3D prints. This is going to allow me to smoothen up some of the areas that came out a little rough. In particular, I make sure to go over really rough parts multiple times just to make sure that it's on there, and that way I can smooth it out later when I sand it. Things can get pretty messy very quickly, so I decided to use a drop cloth that you would use when painting, put that over my table because I knew that I was going to be creating even more of a mess as I started to cover all the other 3D printed parts. I let everything dry overnight, and then I sanded it down with some fine sandpaper to try and get it as smooth as possible for the next step. I then sprayed all the parts with Rust-Oleum Automotive Primer. It's a 2-in-1, it's a filler and sandable. Here's after, I believe it was the first spray. Things were a little thick. And in this particular piece, things were a little thick, but part of that was done on purpose to try and compensate for areas that were really rough. Figured I would get them nice and thick and then sand them down to be smooth. After sanding everything down to a somewhat acceptable level, I moved on to spray paint everything. I used simple semi-gloss Rust-Oleum black spray paint. And then I followed that up with a Rust-Oleum matte spray to kind of seal it in. Additionally, in order to give the tires a more tire feel, I used a black Plasti Dip spray to give them more of a rubbery texture. I also used it on the bottom of the frame, thinking that it might give it a rubbery feel or texture, which would be a little smoother than what it was then. Before painting the rest of the pieces, I went back and sprayed and sanded a little more. Body, for example, I wanted it to be just a little smoother, and I was pretty satisfied with it there. I also wanted to show what the pieces look like after being sprayed and let dry. They look pretty decent. I mean, obviously they're not going to be perfectly smooth because it's not coming out of the factory, but I was happy with it. And I was very happy with the way the tires turned out. After finalizing the sanding of the remaining pieces, I moved on to spray paint the pieces that would be silver, or in this case, shiny. I used Rust-Oleum metallic spray paint for those pieces and went back to using the semi-gloss black paint for the rest of the body and other little pieces. Once all the pieces were painted and allowed to dry, I then glued them. I didn't record that, but here's the final result. I was very happy with the result, and though it may not be perfect, I'm looking forward to including it in my collection. Thanks for watching, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe.